Wish you were one of those influencers with raving fans who binge on your every word, consume all your content, buy everything you have to sell, and demand even more? Then stay tuned while Authority Magazine columnist and BuzzFeed contributor Tracy Hazzard shares strategies, tips, and tactics from top videocasters, podcasters, authors, and social influencers on creating that bingeable factor. Now, let's join Tracy as she explores how to rise above all the digital noise with the Binge Factor.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Binge Factor. I'm Tracy Hazzard, and I have a podcaster in a really interesting and technical area, and he's doing amazingly well. Felipe Engineer-Manriquez. Love the name, and it is real. I asked him, but it is not what he was born with. He changed his name, but he's all about the engineer. You can imagine that this name is getting great play as a podcast host, but also probably great publicity as well. So, while a lot of work to change your name and everything, really strategic in his particular case. He has got the EBFC Show, and that stands for Easier, Better for Construction. Remember, I said really niche, really specific. And he loves to talk about construction, Scrum, and Scrum in general, which we're going to define because I'm just going to leave you hanging until he talks about it, because I would rather it came from him because he wrote the literal book on that. So Felipe is a best-selling author, international keynote speaker, the EBFC Show podcast host, and proven construction changemaker from million to billion-dollar size projects and companies worldwide implementing lean and agile practices. He helps people work twice as fast with half the effort, easier, better, and faster. Felipe is a registered Scrum trainer, a registered Scrum master, and enables change via blogging, coaching, social media, and his book, Construction Scrum. He is also a Lean Construction Institute Chairman's Award recipient for his contributions to the industry. Well, I listened to some of the show, and, I'm not in the construction business, although I do have a background with family in construction. So it's not like I haven't heard these terms before. And I love that we can geek out together on this. You're going to really enjoy the show. You're going to enjoy getting to know him. But one of the things that I want you to really listen for and get an understanding for and think about for your purposes and your show is, how can I apply what Felipe is teaching us here today and showing us about how his show works? How can I apply that to my show so I can construct an easier, better show? Felipe, thank you for joining me. And we're going to talk EBFC Show. I love it. The initials, I love that it has so much meaning. But one of the things that is my favorite is your logo. It has this seal. It looks like a seal of approval, right? It just has this really nice look to it. But I like that you don't actually reveal what it means on your cover art, that you would leave it for your description. And I think that that's so great. So it's easier, better for construction.
That's right, Tracy.
EBFC. I love it.
EBFC kind of just rolls off the tongue. I was just telling somebody recently, like, I borrowed from a great person that came up with this concept of how to make life better for people. And the acronym that they taught was EBFC: easier, better, faster, less costly, or cheaper. Some people today don't like cheaper, but I don't equate the cost of something with the quality of something. Those are two separate things altogether.
Yeah. So I used to work for Herman Miller, right? Because you're from the Chicago area, and I used to live over in the Bay, off the Bay there. And it was Herman Miller had a company back then called SQA. And so Herman Miller SQA was simple, quick, and affordable. And it was like their quick ship program for all of their products. And only people in the know in the industry knew what that was. And that's why I love what you've done here, because when you have something that's going to resonate with a specific audience, and in your case, you're talking to a really, I'm going to call it detail-oriented construction, project management audience here, that, this kind of thing, using acronyms and using these kinds of things, it makes it piques your curiosity, right? That's what it's for. I want to know what that means.
Yeah, we can't even go a day in the built world and not use at least 35 acronyms in a single day. That's just how we roll.
So you might as well coin some new ones and then make that all about your show. I love that. I think it's a great strategy, but it really shows you that you know your audience, you know who you're going to talk to. So what made you decide to start a podcast that was so focused like that?
Yeah. So thank you, Tracy, and love your last name too, Hazzard. I like
maybe not so good for construction, right?
No, it's even better for construction because it makes you like be more methodical. Like, oh, there's danger here. Hazard.
That's right.
And I'll engineer a solution so that no one gets hurt. That's my last name. So it all works perfectly together.
We should do a show together. There's one right there.
Yeah, we're doing a show right now. It's great. And so the genesis of the show was actually the pandemic. I had prior to the pandemic, and I know we can't stop talking about COVID. Apologies to anybody. Warning, I might mention COVID one more time. But at the start, I used to do a lot of speaking engagements and talk about the type of work I do, which is I help companies and project teams actually deliver their work easier and better and faster as a side effect, and then more profitable is a third degree side effect. And so when I couldn't talk anymore, I was like getting cabin fever, to say the least. That's an understatement. So a friend of mine had encouraged me to start my own show, and they'd actually been telling me for 5 years. It took me 5 years to believe that I did actually have something to share and show and tell. And so then I did it. I tried. My first guest was the hardest guest to convince because they're the first one to come on and do it with me. And it was phenomenal. We had a blast. And most of the people I talked to, Tracy, like if you call me, and my friends all know this, like if you call me, it's going to be an hour that we're going to talk. Like it's just, that's going to happen. There are no like, hey, real quick calls. No, not here. So I did it.
My audience knows that sometimes I joke about it all the time because it's like such a broken record here that I'll say, like, if your show is for marketers, they have the attention span of a gnat. Engineers do not have that short attention span. They have a long one. So your audience wants a long show.
We have a long show. Like I talk to people before. Like I spent a lot of time, like a good engineer. I'm actually trained as an electrical engineer, just so people know, like this microphone is enhanced by my hands and my brain. That's why it sounds so velvety smooth. That's by design. Yeah. Thank you, Tracy. It's by design. And so we looked at, and I talked to people that would listen to the show. And I wanted to make sure. I said, what kind of shows you listen to? And I didn't say like thinking of me, because, people will be Midwest nice. And, having grown up in the Midwest, that there is such a thing as Midwest nice. And that politeness can be dangerous, especially when you're going to spend a lot of time and energy creating something. So the feedback I got was long form show. And people said, you have to talk. And some other people recommended I try with guests first before maybe going independent. And I got so addicted to having guests on, I never wanted to do it alone. I love having guests on. So it's my favorite way. And then some shows, the hard thing is, Tracy, some shows I talk to my guests for like 3 hours, but we have a rule and it's 60 minutes or less.
Because you'll keep going.
Yeah. There's been like 2 exceptions, and the audience has really responded, and they come back and listen, and we watch the metrics, and I nerd out and geek out on the analytics with the team. And it's incredible to see that we went from like, my family listening. One of my son's friends was my first subscriber ever on YouTube, which I
love it. I love it. You knew who it was.
Yeah, I knew exactly who it was, and they're still subscribed. And so I always think like, I'm doing something right if I'm keeping that first person still connected, still coming back after all this time. And now we're in over 70 countries worldwide, and it's listened to, and we do live streams now, in addition to the regular show that comes out every 2 weeks. And so I'm just, the feedback from the fans has been like, please and more. And the answer is yes and yes.
Yes and yes. I love it. So this really was actually great for you. So it gave you an opportunity to shift into something, that you love, that you enjoyed. And it comes across in the show. When you listen to Felipe show, you're going to really hear how much he like gets into the conversations with your guests. I actually think it's sometimes shows need to have topics, and occasionally you can always drop one in like a bonus episode. But what I really like is that it's not all your viewpoint, and you're bringing in, and it's kind of it's like a collaborative conversation between you and your guest. And you're really getting that sort of joint perspective view on this aspect of the market or this aspect of the industry or this aspect of this topic. And I love how you're doing that, because I think that that is really bringing in a broader perspective, where I'm sure that, you said you were a speaker before, so it can feel like a lecture otherwise, and not like a conversation, and not like, sharing knowledge.
We wanted the show to feel like, if someone had tapped my phone, that's the feel that you would get. And that's what the show tries to go for. It's why we start every show with just casual dialogue, and some guests, I joke and say, can you give me a good hook? And then it's just crickets, crickets, crickets. No, nothing. They just freeze deer in the headlights. And then other guests, like we find good things to bring people in, let them know what it's going to be about. It's going to be a very easygoing conversation. We're going to get real. You have to be honest to be on my show. You have to speak truth without getting yourself in trouble, because construction has stereotypes, Tracy, that are earned. They are not stereotypes by accident. So
I didn't tell you this before, but I'm an engineering construction brat. Okay. So my father helped build the Alaska pipeline, the Sasso pipeline, and so oil and gas construction and building. He worked for Fluor Daniel as an executive, in the later years. But, in the early days when we used to go into his office, he was in cost and scheduling. So, yeah. So
my favorite people to engage with. But
back then, there wasn't, computers were still cards. So I remember them doing punch cards and being fascinated by the machines. So that's how I grew up. And we actually grew up sometimes off of job sites all around the world. So, so I definitely know the people. Yeah,
our people. And so and on the show we've had, I bring people from all parts. Sometimes we have tradespeople come on, or what people commonly know them as subcontractors. But to me, they're tradespeople because we're all partnered together. And we've had some general contractors. I've had a mental health comedian come on the show, Mr. Frank King, who used to write for Jay Leno. I've had some other people working in the mental health arena, and as well as some executives and authors. I've had a slew of authors. It's like I look back and I was like, how did all these authors break into my show? But it's all been in the guise of serving our audience. And did you know, Tracy, about 1 in 6 people in the world work in construction?
I didn't know it was that many.
It's a huge number. Yeah. It's a huge number.
That's fascinating. So you were just talking about guests. So I want to dive a little bit into our 3 questions that we ask everyone, because let's tap into that and start to learn some more. So you said your first guest was really hard to convince him to come on the show. Yeah. He was great, by the way. So
you hear that, Josh? You got fans out there.
Yeah, you were. He was great. So I don't know what he was worried about, because it was fantastic. But how do you find guests that you're really excited to bring on, and that it's especially after you've done so many episodes and you're headed to your 50th episode. I'm sure you've recorded more than that, but as we're recording this, they haven't gone live yet. But how do you pick them? How do you get them to come on the show?
The easy thing is I made a list. I literally just I use
such an engineering thing to do, right? I made a list.
Straight engineer. Like, who are the people that would be fascinating to talk to, or who's anyone that I've talked to for more than 2 hours straight? And so I made a list, and that is exactly what I did. I just work off the list. I go person by person. We get people scheduled in pretty much any time. We record all different times of the year, all different times of the day. When I used to work full time, I had people would accommodate and come on and record. Like, sometimes we're recording on it's 0 dark 30 on the weekend, and sometimes it was like 9 o'clock at night. For people, some people, I've even been on shows where they're overseas, so we're dealing with like a 1-day time change. And so that's what I do is if I can talk to them and I know they have a story to share. Some of the guests, Tracy, I've had to convince that their story is worth sharing. And I think people underestimate how important it is to share your viewpoint and your perspective. It's been so valuable. And some of the shows where I thought, maybe this show's, not going to do as well as some of the others, they've surprised me, like where people latch on and find it very valuable. You don't always know, like as the guest. So I just try to follow my intuition a little bit, use some curiosity, and then just make my guests feel as comfortable as possible so they can just gab. So
convincing people to come on is interesting, because maybe that's podcasters. I'm asking podcasters to be guests on my show. So they're like, throw themselves at me, but in your industry, I could see how that's different. It's like, do people really want to hear what I have to say? Maybe there's a little bit more.
That's the number one thing, Tracy. People say like, I don't think anyone wants to hear my story. And I said, I like to hear your story, even if it's just for the two of us, let's see what happens. And then, for some guests, I'll share the show when it comes back from editing so they can see that the editing team is just like makes miracles happen. I was like, that's
what you got to love good editing. I love that.
I do love good editing.
So you mentioned that you had your first viewer was, your son's father or friend. And so, how is it getting listeners? I mean, are you finding that sort of marketing promotion of your show difficult? Are you finding it easy? What are you finding is working for you?
Actually, it's been quite easy. I tend to post on social media like on a habit habitually, and I try to share different insights and things that are just going on in my life. The life is pretty interesting in and of itself. And so that alone brings a lot of people to the show. And I feel really fortunate to have the growth that the show has had because we haven't spent really any dollars advertising. We did like some conference things where we did some promotional gifts, but it was like to our core market. I mean, one of the people we were at a conference last year, Tracy, and one of the speakers is a good friend of mine, also is on the show. Shout out to Darlene. Darlene was as an architect and she was on and she asked everybody, she was supposed to be doing like getting people ready to go to the next event. And she stopped and just did a quick poll. How many people listen to Felipe's podcast? And it was like 80% of the room. And I was like, okay, this sponsorship didn't get me anything else, other than just like,
this is working for me.
Yeah. It's like, thank you, everybody. My gift to all of you, for listening to the show and supporting the show. That's just been, I think it's a lot of it just been word of mouth.
That's word of fantastic.
Mouth. Yeah.
Well, because you're filling a niche that there's almost nothing in space.
Yeah. I looked to see like what type of shows are there. There's a handful of like project management type shows in construction, but their audience is also PMs for my show, but the type of things that they talk about is night and day. It's not like the type of show that I have. It's more, it's just different, like the different podcasts. And there's only a handful. I didn't listen to a lot of construction shows, Tracy. I listened more to like, not crime novel type shows, super popular stuff, but more of the fringe podcast things just to get an idea of like what it's like, how easy it is. And then again, I always think about my guests, like every show and the editing team, they're like, yeah, we get it. We know who the audience is, but I can't reinforce enough. Like every decision is always made with the audience in mind.
And it shows. It really does show.
Thank you.
So we always talk about monetization as our third thing. And so many people don't have any monetization model, but you got sponsors.
Yeah. My second show was sponsored.
Your second show was sponsored. I know. I saw that early on. You got some sponsors and which I think when you're in a niche area, it makes a lot of sense because they want it to be in front of the people you're talking to. And so for them, it doesn't really matter. They're smart if they get in early before you grow, right? Before the prices go up. So it's smart for them to do that because if it takes off, they're going to be right in the right place. And so I think that that's what's going on for you. But how has that monetization grown? How is the sponsorship? What do you find is working for you over there?
I think I tell people so I get approached, just lucky again. My show was coming out. I was on a webinar. And one of the people on the webinar with me just told everybody, oh, and by the way, Felipe's got a podcast coming out. And I was like, man, I didn't get to announce it myself.
Let them do all the work for you.
They were so excited. And then the second show was sponsored. And so it was, and then I can't remember exactly when the third sponsor came in, but it was shortly thereafter. And by the time I got to other people calling me about sponsorships, then I had to get serious and make like a marketing plan and a media sponsorship plan. And luckily I have some really good friends that have way more experience in this area than I do. And so I got some good mentorship, Tracy, and that made a big difference. So now if you're listening to me and you want to have this voice read your ad, absolutely available for you. And if you have a construction audience, talk to me. Just send me an email at thefelipe.bio.link. I'm sure Tracy will have all my contact info in the show notes.
We will have them in the blog post for this episode at thebingefactor.com because that's the easiest to remember there. And we will make sure that you can get to him. But you know what? I love it. What he did just there, audience, you have to hear this, is that he asked. That's what I find. About 70% of people who claim they would like to have sponsors for their show never asked.
True. Yeah. And I've approached a couple of companies, and I joke all the time on my show, like Trello, if you're listening, I'm open to receiving a sponsorship from you. I'm a huge fan of Trello. I've used them since 2015, and I would like do amazing stuff. I even did a show, Tracy, on my live stream where I showed people how to use Mural, which is an online whiteboard. And I called Mural out in the post, and I was so excited on LinkedIn. They actually responded back and were supportive. I mean, just no money changed hands. It was just because it's a good product and I like it. And I just wanted to show people, like, if you're confined, here's some help to help you still communicate, collaborate at a high level. Like, let nothing slow you down, people. Tracy is absolutely right. If you're thinking about monetizing, even if you don't have your house in order yet, just start talking to somebody and ask, and you can figure it out.
You'd be surprised, right? Yeah.
And there's even companies that specialize in podcast sponsorships.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is, though, in the early days, it's a lot harder to use a company like that when you don't know what your results are going to be. But, when you get your second episode and you're already getting sponsors, but when they see the value of the audience and they've been dying to reach it and you're going to fill that gap, that's an easy choice for a lot of companies to make and a lot of brands to decide to be associated with it. I'm shocked Trello hasn't jumped in yet because I haven't even emailed them yet. Well, you need to email them because I think they should. So, I did, and this is a podcaster I've got to connect you up with. So Alicia Butler-Pierre, she's got the Business Infrastructure Show. And I mean, you two are going to have fun talking Scrum. So I know you're going to have fun doing that, but she's always asking what tool that you use because she works it into every episode. And so when I was on her show, we were talking about ClickUp, which is something that we use in our production process here. And we have like a whole streamlined, customized program to it. It's like complicated, but we talked about so many other things. She was like, we need to do a whole segment on just that because people want to know about that. Yeah. And so I was like, well, we can always come on and do it again, but I'll do my 5-minute worth there. But, that's so interesting to think about bringing in these tools and things that people are using as, there's an opportunity for sponsorship in a different way.
Right. Yeah. Products that we just know, and people just think about it. Like if you use something in the course of your business, it's even tangentially related to your show. If you know your demographics, and if you're a good podcast host, you do. That's could be an area for improvement. If you're just like, I don't know who listens to my show, that's an easy question to answer.
Well, it may not be easy from day one, but it certainly is easy after you get started, right? You'll know quickly. Well, because I remember we did our very first show was on 3D printing. And we followed the advice, this was, 8 years ago. It was 7 years ago. Oh. And so, so we followed the advice of everyone who was do 20 minutes. And the first thing we did was got complaints. They're like, the show needs to be longer. We want more. Because the audience, we thought we were following the model, but the audience said otherwise.
Absolutely.
And you'll know. So I love that. You said PMs before. And of course, my audience may not, because let's say podcasters are not always process oriented here. So we don't know what project managers are. And so, but that's what PM means. So it says to me though, that you're the perfect person to ask about workflow. And I'd love to understand what your workflow as the host is versus the workflow of your team. But what is it that you personally do in sort of the planning and processing of the podcast?
Oh, I love this. This is the first time I've ever been asked this question, Tracy.
Oh, good.
Now we're going to open up the hood and look underneath and see how this machine works. Let's do it. Yeah. So the first thing I think about is I work backwards. So I go all the way back from the first show. I kind of deconstructed a show. As I watched a couple of shows and I said, this I like, this I don't like. I love this. And then so I said, what elements of that will I take? And so I designed my show with elements that I really enjoy. And so starting the show by just talking right out the gate, you just jumping in the middle of a conversation because the listener, I don't know where they are when they listen, right? Some of my listeners don't know where they are right now. And so
that's right.
So I love that. That was intentional by design. And then we work backwards from there. So to set that up, I've got to give my guests a little bit of a skeleton of questions. And I tell them, I said, these are questions that I may underline, bold, and italicized ask you. And sometimes we don't ask any of those questions.
Well, I'm so glad you don't follow it like a rule, because I could see your guest being so detail oriented would be like, I've got a script.
I've had only one guest that's been like that. Only one. And I won't even give any kind of hints as to who it is to let let them be anonymous in their scripted.
You can tell the difference.
show.
Your audience knows.
I deviated from the questions harder and harder and harder, and they kept coming back to the script, and I was like, okay, it's going to be like this. Let's dance. So we just started dancing.
Well, I was interviewing a bunch of people from Hewlett Packard, and that's what they wanted was all the questions ahead of time. And I kept telling them why I had to refuse to do that. And, and it wasn't going over well at the organization. And finally, the person who was coordinating all these interviews had to step in and send everybody a message saying, you are going to live with that. This whole thing is edited and you're just going to have to live with it. And I was like, I'm getting nowhere.
That's how you deal with engineers.
That's right. And
then so from there, I did it in the early days, Tracy, like I did everything. When I first started, I did all the recording. I had to teach myself editing. And I spent, oh my God, I don't know how many hours learning how to edit and even making the decision, is it audio and video, both? And I decided to go with both because so much of the communication that we have is nonverbal. I wanted to have people have that ability to see this richness of conversation. And occasionally you want to throw something on the screen and it's rare that it happens, but we have actually included some visuals, not as many as I'd like to, but haven't needed to yet. So we solve problems that are real problems, not fake problems. And then from there, as we grew, we try to let's be consistent in the schedule. Because again, looking at design, I studied in particular, what do podcasts that fail have in common? And one of the number one things was consistency. Podcasts
You're
that are not
so
consistent.
right about that.
I did my homework. I engineered this, Tracy.
Well, see, you and I are actually a pair because that's how I engineered our system too, right? I designed it with this and consistency and is really one of the problems. You're so right about that.
Yeah. Even the days that the show automatically drops, that's technologies helps me for that. But then promoting it's every other Wednesday. And then the in-between weeks when we're not dropping a show, we drop a clip. So to give people like a little nugget or just a little bite size, because some people they don't have a long enough commute or they just don't have the time to listen for an hour. So we just give like little value nuggets here and there. And we're on TikTok as well with short nuggets there. Not as consistent yet on TikTok, but we're getting there. And it's just, we iterate on that and just build. Now the other team, I made it clear with the people that help with the show, like your role in helping me for this is this is my expectation. And I said, but if you have other ideas and you're creative, like, let's talk about it. So I was like, this is what I expect. And so I was very clear. And I'd even say like, this is an example, like minute 52 to minute 35 or 58. This is like a good example of what this should be like. And I just made it as easy as possible for people to be successful. And so the results that I've gotten back have just been amazing.
That's so great. So you're really living in the sort of like recording, the messaging, that side of things, and no longer in sort of the workflow of how to do that. Did you develop let's throw out an acronym, an SOP, a standard operating procedure? Did you develop that? How you helped your team do that? Did you plan all of that out?
I did. For some of the people sometimes with experts with a lot of talent, they have some ways that they just operate. And so I asked questions early on, like when I'm picking somebody to join the team and help with the show, I'll ask probably way too many questions. It's probably obnoxious, the number of questions I ask. And all I'm doing in my mind is I'm creating a Scrum board, Tracy. As you know, I'm a Scrum practitioner, registered Scrum trainer, love Scrum. Dr. Jeff Sutherland is one of my
audience probably doesn't know what that means. So seeing
Scrum,
you're the author and expert on here, right?
Yeah,
let's show the book right now. Construction Scrum, right? Let's tell people what Scrum is, because I don't think that everybody, especially my audience, knows what that is. Yeah,
right out the gate, it's not an acronym. So it is actually borrowed. It's a word borrowed from rugby, the game of rugby, which for American audiences is like football, but much more violent.
Yeah, much more violent.
Much more violent. And it's a management framework, which allows for people to reliably and creatively deliver value. And it sounds too good to be true. And it is. It is like incredibly easy to do and use. And the framework is totally free. Like if you go to scrumguides.org, you can read, or you go to my book title is also my book website, constructionscrum.com. there's tons of free resources there. There's videos, case studies, examples, and I've used it in multiple industries. It's pretty much used everywhere. Tracy, on Twitter, I spent a little bit of time teaching a teacher who teaches 7th graders the Scrum framework, and he started using his school, and he started tweeting about it, and it just blew up on Twitter. Now I have like a whole bunch of teachers like following me on Twitter because I do it. And Scrum has even moved into education. So in a nutshell, people, it's a way for you to make your thinking visible so you can see, and it uses things like sticky notes, which I always have handy, or you can use technology like Tracy was talking about, ClickUp or Trello, Jira, Asana. There are Airtable. There are more than 50 different software applications to help you make that process with technology. If you're on the go or you have hybrid teams, or like if you're handing work off to other people, there's so many software solutions available for that. But I use a multitude. I use tech and low tech, analog and digital. Yeah. Low tech always works.
Yeah.
It always works. And so you make your thinking visible, and everything starts with a goal, Tracy. Like, what is the purpose of even having this like thing to do? And that's the first question you ask yourself. And then when you answer that question, that answer becomes your goal, which then becomes a filter for the most powerful word in the human language that all toddlers know across all languages. And that word is no.
I love it.
A lot of people say
they know
yes. No. Yeah. So many people say yes to things and yes to too much. And I was guilty of that myself. Before I started using Scrum, working in the construction industry, I was working 7 days a week for a long time, unsustainably, against my doctor's recommendations.
I bet.
And at a high cost. And it wasn't, there's a whole bunch of reasons why. Stupidity could be one of them, arguably, maybe. Maybe. It depends on what day you ask me. I'll answer to that. But once I learned this framework, I stopped saying yes to things that didn't meet the goal. And that allowed me to just dramatically increase my workflow, my workflow, get into flow, and then do so many things like podcast and travel internationally, speak at conferences, work a full-time job, have a family that actually spends time with me, all of these great things, and have adventures every day, be on shows like yours. All of this is happening through the Scrum framework in my life. Even when I went to grad school, and I used the framework in my management classes when I got my master's in business. And it made the work easy because I still had to work, 50 plus hours a week, and then you do school on your OT, your own time, people. So,
yeah, that's right. You absolutely do. Well, I think now's the perfect time to talk about your binge factor because, while there are patterns of binge factors, right? Like I'll see that there's consistency. Sometimes it's about the way they record and sometimes it's about their audience focus. So there are like themes to it overall. But, the theme that you're fitting into is the fact that you are so in the know. You have absolute deep knowledge here of where you want to educate your audience, what they're looking for, what they're desperately looking for information on, right? Yeah. And you're so in the know on that you're capable of guiding conversations, bringing the right people on, leading them through that in a way in which they're entertained, excited, and learn something from that. And that I think is it's so valuable that someone's going to come back again and again and again, even if you do occasionally repeat them for yourself, which will happen because you're passionate about Scrum. You're bound to touch on a theme. I think I probably said consistent and constant about 10,000 times on this show already. So, so that those happen to us. But the audience accepts that because they know how knowledgeable it is that you must be saying this to stress its importance to them. And they accept that.
It's real for me. I was up, just today, I was up at 3 a.m. for teaching some people about Scrum. They were in a different time zone. And they realized today on the second day that we've been going for 2 days straight. They're like, you got up at what time to do this? Like, my God. They're like, what can we do for you? I said, just ask more questions. I want to see
you do not look like you've been up since 3 a.m. So
Thank you. That's what Scrum does. It's what I binge on.
Yeah, I love it.
I live off of Scrum. It's such an enabling framework. I tell people like it's got a handful of rules, but it lets you it completely sets you free to do what you want.
See, so now my audience is going to be thinking like, I got to check this out. I got to find this out. Now we might need to write Scrum for podcasters, you and I.
Oh, we should.
we should totally do that. I love it. Because in a way, we actually do that with our clients that are working on their strategy piece. They just don't know that they're doing it. Like we don't describe it that way because, most of the people who want to podcast are visionaries and the human, they're people, they're speakers. They just don't like to think that they're going through a process. Like if I told them they were going to go through a process, they wouldn't show up.
That sounds painful.
But they want me to do it, right? They want us to get it done for them. So you have to get information from them somehow. So yeah, I think we should do that. The hidden art of Scrum for podcasting.
That's right. Podcasting, twice the talking and half the time working.
I love it. That's so great. Oh, how much fun it has been talking with you today. What I really want to get to is, and say to you is that I am super impressed that you are one of those podcasters who came to podcasting in the middle of the pandemic, because lots of them did, but you found your place in it and you kept going, because there are so many that started and then they disappeared last year. We lost a lot of potentially great podcasts because they just didn't commit to it. They didn't figure out where their place was in it. They did it out of need, but then didn't continue with figuring out how to make it work in their business, how to make it work in what they wanted to accomplish. And you found a great place for it. I mean, I think it fits your business model. It fits your outreach. It fits your authority building model, because I'm sure you're getting better speeches and programs because of it too. I'm very sure.
Scrum has taken me overseas multiple times. I've gone to Europe, I think now 5 times because of Scrum, fully paid. So people, Scrum doesn't make sense. It pays. It makes dollars.
I love it. So, but what would you want to share, from your perspective on, how someone can get a show started and what they should concentrate on, and, thinking about it from this sort of process and project management perspective, like what can you add to that?
Yeah, the scariest thing for people is your own internal voice, that voice inside your head that says you're not good enough. No one's going to listen. Tell that voice, thank you for the information, but there is somebody out there. There are over 7 billion people on the planet. And I think somewhere north of half of the population on the world has access to the internet now. And podcasting has a very low barrier to entry. If you've got a story to tell, there are going to be thousands, if not millions, if not 1 billion people that would benefit from hearing your story and your take on something. So go out there, people, and share. There are people waiting for your story. You don't know how you're going to transform someone's life. So go out there, stop that voice from stopping you, and help your fellow human beings. Do it. Make the show. Everything else you can learn as you go. Your first show can be bad. It's okay. People forgive that. You'll have fun and you'll learn as you go. And remember that to fail is an acronym, Tracy. FAIL just stands for first attempt in learning. And so I fail daily. And you can get to this, sense and ease. And Tracy, you've been an amazing host. It's been so easy to talk to you. So you can get to this place, people, very quickly. Give yourself permission to go and experiment and do it. The worst that could happen is that I'll subscribe to your show and put a nice comment on your podcast.
I love it. Felipe, thank you so much for being here today. Enjoy your show, the EBFC Show, and it airs every other Wednesday. People have to check it out. Check out a different model of show.
Love it.
I told you it was going to be kind of geeky and really fun too at the same time, right? He's a great host, and you can see that. I mean, he's talking about what might be a really dry and boring subject, but in a completely exciting, energized way. And that is, 90% of the job. And then he does that last 10% with really great systems and process and everything you would expect from an engineer, right? So Felipe Engineer-Manriquez, amazing show. EBFC, you don't want to miss it. You want to check it out, want to find out what he's doing, how it's working for him, and how you might want to apply something called Scrum to your podcast and see if it can work for you. I'm going to certainly work with Felipe and see if we could make it work for all of you too. That would be really fun. So I'm so glad I can bring you such diversity amongst these hosts that I've had on in the last few weeks, especially. Like they're just so different from each other, which keeps me energized and excited, keeps me learning, keeps me having fun. So I can bring you more really great tips, really great ideas, really great podcast shows and hosts. But I do want to hear from you. I want to hear from you. I'd like to know who you would like to have on my show. What podcasts are you following that you would like me to explore and talk about the behind the scenes with their host? Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Don't forget, you can go to the blog post for this episode. You can find out about construction Scrum and all the other great things Felipe shared with us in this episode. You can find that at the blog post for this episode at thebingefactor.com. Thanks, everyone. I'll be back next week with another Binge Factor podcast.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.